You're not lazy. You're waiting on a broken instruction. You've been told to wait until you feel like it. Wait until you're motivated. Wait until you're inspired. Wait until something inside you clicks into place and finally makes the hard thing feel doable. And you've been following that instruction faithfully for years, which is exactly why you're still stuck. Here's the part nobody told you. Motivation doesn't come before action. It comes after. It's not the spark that starts the fire. It's the heat the fire gives off once it's already burning. You've had the order backwards this whole time. And every single day you spend waiting to feel ready is a day spent obeying a rule that was never going to work, because the feeling you're waiting for is downstream of the exact behavior you're refusing to do until it shows up. Think about what that actually costs you over a year. It's not one missed morning. It's 50 missed mornings at the gym, 3 unopened side project folders, a resume that's been almost ready to update since spring. None of that is a discipline problem in the way you've been told it is. It's a sequencing problem. You've been standing at the starting line, arms crossed, waiting for a green light that was never wired to turn on before you started walking. The light turns on because you walked, not the other way around. Here's what we're covering today: where this backwards idea came from and why your own memory keeps lying to you about it. The actual mechanism, straight out of clinical psychology, that proves behavior creates mood more reliably than mood creates behavior. And then the practical part, how to use this so it works in your career, your money, and your hardest days, including the days when pushing yourself is exactly the wrong move. Let's start with the myth itself, because it's not stupid. It's not even unreasonable. It's just aimed the wrong direction. And once you see why it feels so convincing, you'll never fall for it the same way again. Where this myth actually comes from, think about the last time you felt genuinely locked in the zone at the gym, deep in a project at work, fully present in a hard conversation you'd been avoiding. Now ask yourself honestly, when did that feeling actually show up? Not when you decided to go. Not when you were tying your shoes or opening the laptop. It showed up a few minutes into the thing, after the first set, a few paragraphs in. Partway through the conversation, once you realized it wasn't going as badly as you'd built it up to be. But that's not how you remember it. Your memory takes that whole experience and compresses it into a single, tidy story. I was motivated, so I went. The lacing of the shoes and the feeling of being locked in get merged into one moment in your recollection, even though they were separated by real time and real effort. Memory is not a video recording. It's an editor, and it edits for coherence, not accuracy. It wants a clean cause and a clean effect, so it quietly moves the feeling to the front of the timeline where it makes a better story. Here's a small experiment you can run on yourself to catch it in the act. Next time you finally do the thing you've been avoiding, stop right in the middle and ask, was I feeling this way when I started? Or did this show up somewhere in the first few minutes? Almost every time, if you're honest, the feeling arrived after the first small piece of friction was already behind you. You'll catch your own memory trying to backdate the feeling to the beginning, in real time, and that's the exact mechanisms this whole chapter is describing. Do this enough times, across enough workouts and enough deadlines, and you build an entire personal mythology out of edited footage. You come away convinced that motivated people just have more of that feeling on tap, that they wake up wanting to do the hard thing, while you're stuck waiting for a version of yourself that never quite arrives. That belief isn't a character flaw. It's a data problem. You're building your model of how willpower works from evidence that's been silently reordered. And once that reordering has happened enough times, it hardens into an instruction you never question. Wait for the feeling, then act. It sounds like self-knowledge. It's actually a rule with the cause and effect flipped, and no amount of white-knuckling your way through the waiting is going to fix a rule that's broken at the root. So let's look at what the actual order of operations is, because there's real research behind it, and it's more useful than anything your memory has been telling you. The real order of operations. There's a technique used in cognitive behavioral therapy, particularly in treating depression, called behavioral activation. The core idea is almost insultingly simple, and that's exactly why it works. Instead of waiting for a depressed patient to feel motivated enough to get up, get dressed, and take a short walk, the therapist has them do those things first. While the motivation is still completely absent, act as if. Move the body before the mind agrees to it. This isn't about ignoring how someone feels or pretending a real illness away. It's a recognition, backed by decades of clinical use, that mood follows behavior far more reliably than behavior follows mood. Waiting for depression to lift before taking action keeps people frozen indefinitely, because the lift they're waiting for is generated by the action itself. Skip the action, and you've cut off the only reliable source of the feeling you wanted. Here's the mechanism, and it applies just as much to you chasing a goal as it does to clinical treatment. Starting a task produces feedback, a finished paragraph, a completed set, a sent email, a reply from someone you were nervous to text. That feedback is small, but it's real, and your brain registers it immediately. You did a thing, and the world responded, even if the response was just a checkbox in your own head. That feedback loop is what generates the lift people call motivation. It's not anticipation. It's not hype. It's not a mindset talk yourself into before you begin. It's the byproduct of having already begun. Notice what this means for the way you've probably been trying to fix your own stuck patterns. If you've ever tried to talk yourself into wanting to go to the gym, pulling up old progress photos, rewatching a motivational video, telling yourself a stern little speech in the mirror, you were trying to generate step 3, the feeling, without touching step 1, the action. That's why it works for about a day, and then stops working. You topped up a feeling that had nowhere to attach itself, because no behavior was underneath it, holding it up. This is the actual sequence, and it's worth saying plainly because it inverts everything you've probably assumed. Action first, feedback second, motivation third, not motivation first. The version you were taught has the arrow pointing the wrong way, and every day you spend trying to manufacture motivation before you'll allow yourself to start is a day spent trying to generate step 3 without ever running steps 1 and 2. Once you actually see that order clearly, the next question answers itself. If motivation isn't what you're missing, what is it you're actually waiting for? And the honest answer is a little uncomfortable. Why waiting for certainty is the actual trap. Here's the part most people won't admit to themselves. You're not really waiting to feel motivated. You're waiting to feel certain. Certain the effort is going to be worth it, certain you won't waste your time, certain the outcome will justify what it costs you to try. And that certainty is never going to arrive before the work starts. It can't. It's not being withheld from you out of bad luck. It structurally does not exist yet, because the information you need to feel certain only gets generated by doing the thing you're refusing to do until you feel certain. Picture someone who won't start a business plan until they feel ready. Ready looks like knowing it'll work. But there is no version of knowing it'll work available before you've written the plan, tested a piece of it, put it in front of a real person, and gotten a real reaction. They're asking their own brain for a piece of information, that can only be produced downstream of the exact action they're stalling on. It's a chicken and egg loop, dressed up to look like patience and responsibility, when really it's just delay wearing a more respectable outfit. This shows up everywhere once you start looking for it. The resume that doesn't get updated until you feel confident about your chances. The pitch that gets rewritten in your head 50 times before a single word hits the page. The workout that keeps getting pushed to Monday because today doesn't feel like the right day to really commit. The side project that stays a folder on your desktop for 18 months because you're waiting to feel like you finally know enough to start it properly. In every one of these, the person isn't lazy and isn't lacking ambition. They've just set an entry requirement. Certainty, readiness, the right feeling. That can be met by doing the exact thing the requirement is blocking. Here's the tell that you're in a certainty trap, rather than a genuine information gap. Ask yourself what specific piece of information you're actually missing. If you can name it precisely, a price, a date, a phone number you need to make a call, that's a real gap, and closing it is the right next step. But if the honest answer is something fuzzy, like, I just want to feel more sure about this, there's nothing left to research. You've hit the edge of what thinking can give you, and the only way past it is doing the thing and letting reality hand you the information your imagination can't. So if certainty can't come first and motivation can't come first, what actually can? The answer is smaller than you'd expect, and it's the part of this whole idea that's genuinely actionable today. The 2-minute entry point. If waiting for the big feeling doesn't work, the fix isn't to try harder to feel it. It's to shrink the task down until it requires no motivation at all to begin. Not write the report. Just open the document and write one sentence. Not go to the gym and have a great workout. Just put on your shoes and walk out the door. The task gets reduced to something so small that refusing it would almost be more effort than doing it. This idea has a popular name. James Clear calls it the 2-minute rule in Atomic Habits, and it's a genuinely useful way to package what we've been talking about. But here's the detail people miss. The 2 minutes were never the point. Nobody actually cares whether you wrote for exactly 2 minutes or did exactly 2 minutes of exercise. The 2 minutes are a trigger. Their entire job is to get you past the only part of this that was ever hard, the beginning. So the feedback loop from a minute ago can start running. Once you've written one real sentence, you're not staring at a blank page anymore. You're editing a draft. Once you've done one set, you're not deciding whether to work out anymore. You're mid-workout. The decision that felt enormous a minute ago has already been made, quietly, by a version of the task so small it didn't feel like a decision at all. Here's how to actually build one of these entry points. Instead of just nodding along with the idea, take whatever's been sitting on your list the longest and ask what the smallest physically possible first move is. Not the smallest reasonable chunk of work, the smallest physical action. Not read a chapter, but open the book. Not clean the apartment, but pick up one item off the floor. It should feel almost embarrassingly small. If it doesn't feel a little silly, it's probably still too big, and you've accidentally rebuilt the same wall you were trying to get around. This is why just start smaller isn't a cute productivity trick. It's a direct application of the mechanism from a minute ago. You're deliberately engineering the entry point to be frictionless because you already know feedback generates motivation, and you can't get feedback without starting. Shrink the barrier, get the feedback, let the motivation show up as the reward for having moved rather than the price of admission for moving at all. But shrinking the entry point only explains why starting gets easier. It doesn't explain why, once you've started, you suddenly don't want to stop. That part has its own name too. Why starting is the hard part, not finishing. There's a well-documented pattern in psychology called the Zeigarnik effect, named after the researcher who first observed it back in 1927. The finding, in plain terms, is that unfinished tasks occupy more mental space than completed ones. Something you've started but not closed out keeps tugging at your attention in the background. A low hum of unfinished business your brain doesn't want to let go of. Something you've actually finished, on the other hand, gets filed away and mostly stops bothering you. This is the second half of the mechanism, and it's the part that makes the 2-minute entry point so effective. The moment you cross from haven't started to have started, even barely, Your brain's relationship to the task flips. It's no longer an abstract obligation sitting untouched on a list. It's an open loop, and open loops pull at you until they close. That pull is uncomfortable in a useful way. It's the same restlessness that makes you want to check a message you started typing but didn't send, or finish a show you're 2 episodes into, or go back and finish a level in a game you quit halfway through. Once the loop is open, closing it starts to feel like the path of least resistance, not the effortful choice. You've probably felt the flip side of this too, and it's worth naming because it shows the effect working in reverse. Think about a task you fully finished and then, 20 minutes later, could barely remember doing. A folded load of laundry, an email you sent and closed the tab on, a form you submitted. It stops occupying space almost instantly because the loop closed and your attention had nothing left to hold on to. Compare that to the half-written email still sitting in your drafts folder, which you can probably picture right now without trying. That contrast is the Zeigarnik effect, running in your own head all the time, whether you've ever heard the name for it or not. This is exactly why the hardest 5 minutes of any workout are the first 5, not the last 5. Why the hardest sentence of an essay is the first one, not the 2,000th word. Why the hardest part of a difficult conversation is opening your mouth, not staying in it once you're a minute in. The friction is almost entirely loaded onto the starting line. Cross it, even with something as small as 1 sentence or 1 set, and the Zeigarnik effect starts doing quiet work in the background, pulling you toward the finish instead of you having to drag yourself there. So that's the full mechanism, start to finish. Shrink the entry point, get the feedback, let the open loop pull you the rest of the way. Now let's make it concrete, starting with a place most of you are stuck right now, your career. What this looks like in your career. Take the job search that's stalled at "I'll start Monday." It rarely stalls because someone doesn't want a better job. It stalls because updating the resume got quietly assigned a prerequisite. Feel confident first, then update it. And confidence about a job search you haven't started yet is not a feeling that exists to be summoned. Same with the pitch you've rewritten in your head a dozen times without drafting a single line. You're polishing a version of it that only exists as anxiety, not as a document. And anxiety doesn't get less loud the longer you rehearse against it in your head. Professional writers who actually publish on a consistent basis will tell you the same thing in almost identical language. They don't wait to feel like writing. They sit down at a fixed time, on a fixed schedule, whether the mood is there or not. The sitting down is the non-negotiable part. Inspiration, when it shows up at all, tends to show up after page 1, as a response to having started, not as a precondition for starting. Treat the schedule as sacred, and the feeling as optional, and the output keeps happening regardless of what kind of day it is. The same pattern shows up in interview prep, which is its own special kind of stalling. Most people wait to feel ready before they'll do a single mock interview, which means the first time they actually practice answering a hard question out loud is in the real interview with real stakes attached. Flip it. Book one practice conversation with a friend for 20 minutes, badly prepared, before you feel anything close to ready. The awkward, unpolished version of that conversation does more for your actual readiness than another week of silently rehearsing answers in the shower. 'Cause it's the only version that generates real feedback about what you don't know yet. You can run the same play on your own stalled career move. Don't wait to feel confident about the job search. Open the resume and fix one bullet point. Don't wait to feel ready to pitch the idea. Write 3 rough sentences of it, badly, right now. You're not trying to finish the resume or nail the pitch in that first pass. You're trying to open the loop, because once it's open, the Zeigarnik pull starts working in your favor instead of against you, and the version of you that isn't ready yet quietly stops being the one running the show. Career moves are one thing when the payoff is visible fairly soon. Money is a different animal because the payoff can be years away, and that distance changes the whole game. What this looks like with your money. Career efforts at least have a shape you can imagine. An interview, an offer, a launch. Money goals like saving or paying off debt often don't have that shape at all. The payoff is so far in the future, so abstract, that it can't generate any motivation on its own, no matter how badly you want it. Nobody feels a rush of inspiration about a retirement account. There's no in-the-zone feeling attached to a number that only matters in 15 years. This is exactly where the small start principle earns its keep. Automate a small, almost trivial transfer to savings on the day you get paid. Not because $10 or $20 a paycheck is going to move the needle on its own. It won't, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. It matters because the act of having started changes your relationship to the goal. Before that transfer exists, save more money is a vague, distant intention sitting entirely in your head, easy to postpone indefinitely because it has no anchor in anything you've actually done. After it exists, it's a running behavior. The next, larger action, bumping the transfer up, opening a second account, actually building a real budget, isn't a fresh, dreaded beginning anymore. It's a continuation of something already in motion, and continuations are always easier to start than beginnings. Debt payoff works on the exact same logic, just pointed the other direction. Someone staring down a stack of credit card balances often stalls out trying to design the perfect payoff strategy before making a single extra payment, waiting to feel certain they've picked the mathematically optimal order before they'll commit to any of it. Meanwhile, the smallest possible first move is sitting right there. Pick the card with the lowest balance and send it one extra payment this week, even a small one. It won't be the theoretically optimal move, and that's fine. The point isn't optimization, it's opening the loop. Once one balance is visibly shrinking, the whole project stops being a wall of numbers and starts being something you're already doing, and doing more of it stops requiring a fresh burst of willpower every single time. This is the same mechanism as the resume and the 2-minute rule, just running on a longer timeline. You're not trying to feel motivated about your financial future. You correctly sense that you can't, because the feedback loop on a 15-year goal is too slow to generate anything in the short term. So you manufacture a smaller, faster loop instead. The transfer happens, you see it happen, and that tiny piece of evidence, I am someone who does this now, becomes the seed the bigger goal grows out of. None of this means you should be gritting your teeth and forcing a start every single day, no matter what. There's a real limit to this framework, and ignoring it is how people turn a useful tool into a way of beating themselves up. The days this trick doesn't work, here's the honest caveat, and it matters as much as everything before it. On days when you're genuinely exhausted, burnt out, or grieving, forcing a tiny start is the wrong move. Real rest is the right one, and no amount of 2-minute tricks or open-loop psychology should talk you out of that. The distinction that actually matters is this. Low motivation with normal energy responds well to a 2-minute start. You don't feel like doing the thing, but your body and your baseline capacity are intact. You're just stuck at the starting line, and a small nudge is enough to get you moving. Low motivation with depleted energy is a completely different signal. That's not a starting line problem. That's your system telling you it's running on empty, and what it needs is recovery, not a productivity hack dressed up as discipline. Here's a rough way to tell the two apart when you're not sure which one you're looking at. Ask what happens in your imagination the moment you picture starting. If the resistance is mostly boredom or a mild sense of, ooh, not this again, that's usually low motivation with the tank still full. A 2-minute start will very often flip it. If the resistance comes with a heavier, almost physical weight behind your eyes, or the thought of starting makes you want to cry rather than groan, that's a different signal entirely, and it deserves rest, sleep, or support, not a productivity technique. Confusing these two is exactly how this framework gets weaponized against yourself. If you treat every low-energy day the same as a low-motivation day, you end up forcing tiny starts on top of real depletion, which doesn't produce a feedback loop. It just produces more depletion, plus a fresh layer of guilt when the trick doesn't work, on a day it was never designed for. The 2-minute rule is for the days you're avoiding something out of habit or fear. It is not a substitute for sleep, for grieving on your own timeline, or for genuinely recovering from burnout. Knowing which day you're actually having is half the skill here, and it's the half that keeps this whole idea from turning into self-punishment. So let's bring it all the way back together, because there's one clean idea underneath everything we've covered today. Closing, recap, and the one sentence to remember. Here's the whole arc in order. Motivation follows action, it doesn't lead it. The feeling you've been waiting for is generated by starting, not required for it. That myth persists because your memory quietly reorders your own experience, filing the feeling as if it came before the effort when it actually arrived a few minutes in. Behavioral activation shows the real mechanism at work in clinical psychology. Act first, and mood follows more reliably than the reverse. What you're actually stalling on usually isn't motivation at all, it's certainty. And certainty can't exist until after you've already begun, which makes waiting for it a trap with no exit. The fix is shrinking the entry point until it takes no motivation to cross. One sentence, one set, one bullet point fixed, one small transfer setup, and then letting the feedback loop and the Zeigarnik pull do the rest. Because once a task is open, your own mind starts working to close it for you. We saw it play out in a stalled job search and a pitch that only existed as anxiety until it hit the page. In interview prep that only gets real once you've had one awkward practice round, and in a savings habit and a debt payoff plan too small to matter on their own, but big enough to change how you relate to the bigger goal. And through all of it, know the difference between avoiding something out of habit and being genuinely depleted. One calls for a 2-minute start, the other calls for rest, and mixing them up is how a useful idea turns into self-punishment. If you had to leave with one sentence, make it this one. Don't wait to feel ready. Do the smallest possible version of the thing, and let the readiness catch up to you. If this shifted how you think about the goal you've been postponing, stick around. There's more like this on the channel, and the next one might be exactly the nudge you need.